Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out today to listen to my clinic on upgrading an HO scale Proto 2000, GP7, GP9 in three different ways. Um, as I said, or as you probably read in the description, the goal of this is to add DCC and sound, improve the running quality of the units. A lot of folks, I think, are intimidated by doing a DCC installation, or maybe you've never done one that requires a bit more work than just popping off the shell and putting in a decoder. And so I thought this would be a good clinic to sort of present that. I wanted real quick just to thank Martin Brightbill for encouraging me to do this. And I also wanted to thank Tom, Maddie, and Kelly Regan for their some technical input. So let's see here. So why would I want to upgrade one of these GP9 or GP7 Proto 2000 units? Well, I modeled the Georgetown branch of the B&O, as many of you know, in 1945 to 55, and these were real workhorses on the branch in that time frame. So they're a model that I need on my layout, and Proto 2000 made these nice models, and they're very plentiful. They've been around for a really long time. You can pick them up at train shows and on eBay. We'll talk more about that later. They're very relatively affordable. And so that, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to try installing the sound, upgrade these. So there's many ways to skin a cat. This is the way I did it. This is what worked for me. This is the approach that I took. So this is, your mileage may vary. Use the tools, use the parts that you're comfortable with. And I'm not an expert in this. I learned along the way. I'm going to let you guys in on a dirty little secret. This was my very first DCC installation that I ever did. So you're going to learn, you'll see how I learned along the way. Also, this is not like a clinic on how to solder and how to, use tools and things like that. That kind of stuff, you can find tutorials on YouTube and they're plentiful. And as I've said before, just practice. This is a great way to jump in if you want to kind of, take a try at installing a decoder. This is a good starting point. So what are the three ways that we're going to look at? The first way that we're going to do is milling the frame, which is required to fit the decoder in the unit and in sound in the unit. We're going to install DCC, a sound decoder. We're going to modify some of the electricals. We're going to add LED lights, and we're going to replace some of the gears. The second method is all of method one, but additionally, we're going to do a little bit more frame milling, and we're going to upgrade the motor as well as some of the running gear. Method number three is a full frame replacement and running gear replacement with a Stewart Cato drive, and also along with DCC and sound. This also works with the Proto 2000 GP18 model, as you'll see later. So I wanted to go over real quick what supplies and tools you'll need, all right? Because some of these things you probably already have, some of them you may not have. So I'm just going to walk through this. These are the things that, might not be common on your workbench, but you're going to need them to do the job. So soldering station, this, workhorse here is, maybe some of you have one of these. You can pick it up on at Amazon for like $46. It has a replaceable tip. It has a variable heat. It's a nice little, the Weller WLC 100. It's a nice little unit. Solder, I recommend you get a high quality solder. This Kester solder is a 6337 tin and lead mix. I think I have that right. And it's a really nice solder. I recommend you get a high quality solder. It doesn't have to be this one, maybe one that works well for you if you already have one that you like. You're going to want some liquid flux. I recommend this Kester 186. I've used this. It works really well. Do not use the solder paste that you have in your plumbing toolkit. This stuff is a little bit more aggressive. It has chemicals that can sort of etch the metal. It's not very good for electronics. Stay away from that if you can. I recommend you don't use that in model railroading in general, unless it's all you got. But you can get some of this liquid solder real easily. So a soldering tip cleaner. This is one, just one brand. I think it's Hako. There's many out there. They can be had for a few bucks. This is good for keeping that tip clean as you're working. A third hand clamp. I think most of us are familiar with this, and this is another sort of essential thing to have when you're working, when you're doing soldering. Sometimes, you gotta get two wires together and they're in a confined space and you really need to get in there and get them, keep them together. This thing is very handy to have. An assortment of heat shrink. You can go on Amazon and get a box of assorted heat shrink tubing, all different sizes. It helps to have the bigger sizes when, for other projects, but they usually go down pretty small. I would recommend that if it doesn't have it, that you do go get some 1mm heat shrink tubing, because the really fine wire that we're going to be using, you're going to want that really small heat shrink. The Uhu Tack putty is a sort of a gummy putty that you use to put posters up on the wall. I don't know. I used that when I was in college and things like that. It's handy for that sort of application. It's really handy in this application for holding things like LED lights, tubes in place and things like that, as you'll see later. Double-sided tape, just some thin double-sided tape. You're going to need that for a few different installation pieces. You're also going to need some of this polyamide or Kapton tape. It's like an electrical tape that's kind of an insulator. It's very handy for strapping things down and providing insulation where you need it. You're also going to need some wire, some decoder wire. This is 30 gauge wire. It's sold by Digitrax. It's a $15 pack. It has all different colors and it's a great assortment. I recommend getting something like this instead of trying to use scraps and things. It's just nice to have the wire. It's not too expensive. I do also recommend that you get a decent quality wire stripper that can handle the smaller gauge wires. This Klein one can be had for about 21 bucks. You can also use those adjustable ones that have a little nut that you kind of adjust to get different size. Those will work well too. If you have one of those, you can use that as well. These are flush cut nippers. Again, a lot of us probably already have a set of these on the workbench. I would recommend getting a set and devoting it strictly to doing your DCC installations or your electronics installations. Something that isn't going to get that the blades aren't going to get marred or dinged up from anything else, because you really want something that can cut well, and it's just much more convenient than using some wire cutters that are maybe older or can't cut as well. With these smaller wires, you want something nice and sharp. Some double-sided foam tape. You're going to need a bit of that, and then an assortment of resistors is something I would also recommend. Again, Amazon, you can buy a pack of these for like $8, and it's just nice to have in your arsenal, because at some point you're going to need a resistor and you may not have it. And these assorted ones, you can use them for other projects as well. The flowable silicone is just a sort of an adhesive that you're going to be using to install I used it in my installation to install the speaker into the enclosure, which we'll get to later. All right, so what other materials are you going to need? Well, you're going to need your Proto 2000 model. Again, these can be found at a train show or eBay. They can still be had for low prices if you hunt around. I buy them or have purchased them in the recent past for 25 to 50 bucks on eBay. If you're in the $40 to $60 range, that's a great price. 60 to 80 is okay. On eBay right now, the prices are anywhere from 50 to 100 bucks, depending on what you're looking for. I just looked the other day and I saw one that had a bid of 45 bucks on it, and it's a B&O unit as well. So, sometimes you can find road names that maybe aren't as popular. It just depends on what you're looking for. Keep your eyes peeled. I set up alerts on eBay, and then I just look for the ones with the low bids, and those are the ones I go for. The decoder that I used is the Lokesound 5 58420, which comes with the wires and a plug attached. I didn't need the 8-pin plug, so that got cut off, but it's not a big deal. It just kind of chopped that right off. The keep alive or stay alive that I used is this Lokesound Power Pack Mini, the 54671, about 40 bucks. And then so let me talk real quick about LEDs. When I put this together, I used an LED kit by Big Al Mayo. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with his kits. Unfortunately, he's out of production as far as I know. We haven't seen him on the table in a while. But LED kits, you can find them out there. They have them at the hobby shop, and we'll also talk about some other options for that coming up. And the speaker that I used is a TCS Was it the UNIV SH1-C 1704? It's a speaker and an enclosure for $17. And then if you own one of these locomotives and you haven't, you're going to be replacing the gears. If it's been sitting on the shelf and it has never been touched, you're going to be replacing the gears. No matter what, you're going to be replacing the gears. This is the Achilles heel of these Proto series locomotives. As many of us know, the gears crack, the gears break. These are the little replacements here. We're going to show how that works in this presentation, but that's something that you're going to need to do. Buy these, you're going to need to replace them. A quick note about speakers, Scale Sound Systems, which maybe some of you aren't familiar with. They make custom speaker enclosures, and they have a few that will work for this unit. I've just listed them here for reference. We'll talk more about that later. Real quick note. So Athearn will sell you these sort of pre-assembled wheel plus bearings plus gear replacement plus axles. I would stay away from these. And you ask me, why would you stay away? That's so easy. You can just drop them right into your locomotive. That's true. I bought a bulk pack of these from Athearn, and they came with pre-cracked gears, which was really convenient for them, I guess. So I had to take them apart, throw the gears away, buy replacement gears, and just do the whole thing over. So just buy the gears. Don't buy these that have they're already pre-assembled, because I think that when they sit in the bag for however long they sit, the gears can crack. All right, decoders, Coke, Pepsi, RC Cola, Mountain Dew, whatever. Everyone has a preference on what they like to run with. So that's, in this case, that is valid. You don't have to use what I used. I used ESU. Use whatever you like. You can, if you're familiar with TCS decoders or Digitrax or Soundtrax, you can do whatever you want, and you just need to adjust how you might need to make sure that they will fit. You might need to mill less, you might need to mill more from the frame. Just something to think about. But yeah, Kelly, he prefers the TCS decoders in his installation. I use the ESU. Again, you're going to see ESU, but use whatever you like. Speakers, as I mentioned earlier, this is the speaker that I used. And if you look, here you'll see it kind of mocked up actually it's installed in place in the locomotive where the frame has been milled out to accommodate it. Other options, Scale Sound Systems sells this one right here, which is also a drop-in in the Proto frames. It occupies the space where the cab is, so it kind of blocks it out. But it is a nice drop-in. It got a big speaker, really nice sounding. They also make these other ones that I contacted Scale Sound Systems, and they recommended these two as potential options as well that would fit in this space. Slightly different dimensions, but they will fit. There's probably others out there. I'm sure you may know of a supplier that makes your favorite speaker, and you can fit that into the installation. So LEDs, Big Al Mayo, he used to make these incredible LED kits, came with everything. They were the best. They had all different LED options. They had these light tubes, all the wires, all the resistors, everything. You just pop them in. They're fantastic. He doesn't make them anymore, as far as I know. What's out there? There's tons of stuff out there. If you go to Mainline Hobby, they've got some stuff on the shelf that you could use, some kits. Scale Sound Systems actually sells these little conversion kits. They sell all the parts. These are the light tubes for the headlights, and they kind of slot right into the nose lights. There's different configurations, different sizes, and there's a sampler kit if you want to just try, see what works for your application. It even comes with the surface mount LEDs. Let's talk about LEDs. So SMD is a surface mount device. These little tiny, I should have put like a coin on here. Well, this is a photo from eBay, but these little tiny LEDs, the 402s and the 603s, they're just absolutely tiny, and they're wonderful for these applications. They're very affordable to get. They're about $1 a piece, for these 402s on eBay. These 402s are good for like the smaller light applications. So your steps, your cabs, things like that. You can use them in headlights as well if you prefer a dimmer headlight. But these 603s are really great for headlights if you want a brighter one. And don't forget resistors. We talked about that, having a pack of resistors. All right. So let's get started real quick. So disassembly. This is the chassis here. The frame just sits on the chassis with 2 screws, and they're right here and here. And you're just gonna, flip it over, pop out the screws. Some of these units have couplers that need to be removed as well, but that's just another step. You just take the screws out of the coupler boxes and pop those off along with it. The shell comes off, and of course, in this photo, I don't show that. I just wanted to show the screws, the location of the screws for the shell. But when you take the shell off, you're going to cut the wires from this circuit board right here. This is a circuit board on top of the weight. You're basically going to unscrew the 2 screws that hold it on and pop off these little plastic tabs that hold the wires on. And then the wires are just going to be loose at that point. You remove these 2 plastic plates, which are holding the lights, the old incandescent bulbs in place. You just pop them out. And this stuff is all coming off. Everything on the top here is coming off. All right. And this just shows what it looks like where the pickups are. Next step, we're going to take the side frames off. So right here, if you can see, there's a side frames, they pop straight off. They're just a friction fit. They've got this center sort of pin that goes into this locator hole here, and then these other two locators slot onto those 2 pins there. So it's just a friction fit. They pop straight off. Next up, we're going to take the cover off to get access to the gears that are going to be cracked. You just basically slide a screwdriver in here and kind of pop this one up, slide a screwdriver on the other side, pop that one up, and just do the other one, and then the whole thing will pop right off. It's really simple. It only takes a moment. It's very simple to pop the cover off. Once you get the cover off, you can see these are the offending gears. A lot of times, if you look really closely with a magnifier, you'll actually see the crack right across the gear. It's so common. Just expect it if you haven't done it already. And the gears and axles, wheel sets just come straight out. Just lift them straight out. And then to replace these broken gears, you just twist these wheels in opposite directions and pull it apart. It's a half shaft axle. They just pull apart. And you just pop the new wheel in, squeeze it, adjust it till it fits, and then slot it right back into the mechanism. There's no video here as far as how to do that. There's tons of videos on YouTube if you want to see it in action. You can do a live clinic as well for that. So the fuel tank, another thing that's pretty easy to to remove. You just put a screwdriver next to it, twist the screwdriver ever so gently, and it'll pop straight off. There's just a piece of double-sided tape that holds that fuel tank air reservoir on the bottom. And then on the bottom, you'll see there's this double-sided tape, and then there's 4 little sort of recesses here for the engine there's 6 of them for the engine cradle sits into these locator holes. 2 of the holes are screws which hold on the weight. So you just pop those. I just sliced through the little double-sided tape there, and I pulled the screws out, and that releases the weight from the frame. It's really simple. All right. Now the frame comes right off the top, and then here's what you've got. Now, to fit the decoder and the speaker into this unit, you're going to need to mill it. And Kelly and I did some thinking about this and, fitting and trying to figure out how this is going to work. And this is what we ended up with. So this is to fit the speaker enclosure and the decoder and all the wires and all the pieces. This is how much needed to be milled. Now, you can do this with hand tools. Some of you may have already done it with hand tools. You can do it with a sharp hacksaw. You can use a small, one of those fine tooth saws. It'll take you a long time. Or you could use a Dremel, or there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Plan ahead with how you're going to do it. If you have somebody who has access to a mill, that's even better. So in my case, Kelly has not just 1, but 2 mills. And so we went over there one day and we had a sort of Millapalooza, where we basically milled out a whole bunch of frames. We each had a bunch of these units. And so we spent the day just milling out the frames. The trickiest part is actually getting it into the vise and getting it held securely, because as you can imagine, there's a motor inside that motor sits inside of this area of the weight. So it's very kind of fragile. So you can't put a lot of pressure on it. So you got to be careful with how you get it into the jig there, or into the vise, and hold it down. So here we are. We've done these two. These are different. This is his GP18, so he milled his a little bit differently than mine. And one of the things we noticed as we were doing this, and don't be surprised if your frame looks different than what you see here. In just a random assortment of frames that we had 3 different styles for, between the GP7, GP9s. And it didn't really make much sense as to why. They kind of changed the design over the years, I guess, for different applications, high nose, low nose, a kind of a hybrid here. But the gist of it is the same. It's where you're going to mill. So one other step that I took was to cut. I wanted a little bit of extra space in mine. So these are the power pickups. They're located right over the wheels. And I wanted to put my keep alive, my stay alive, in this location. So I decided to cut these down and solder my wire on the back, on the inside of these pickups. So I just cut them with my Dremel tool. And one of the things in retrospect that I would recommend, take the motor out first, which I should have done. The motor, just once you take the screws out of the bottom for the weight, and the weight comes off, the motor just pops right out. It's just held in with little rubber feet. I don't know why, but again, lessons learned. Take the motor out first before you cut that pickup. Now, the lights. If you want to have individual number boards and headlights, you need to remove the light bar, this plastic piece. There's one in the front and one in the rear here. And you can see the way it works is they shine a light here and it illuminates the headlights and the number boards. I decided that I wanted individual lighting for the number boards and the headlights. I wanted it separate. If you want, you can just put an LED on the end of this light bar. I just mocked it up here. Put a light there and you're done. And you'll have lights and they'll all work. But if you're like me and you want individual lights, you're going to need to take the next step. So you just basically wiggle this piece out. It's friction fit into the shell. You wiggle it straight out, and then you're going to need to cut it. I've kind of highlighted the areas that you're going to discard and the areas that you're going to save. So we're just basically saving the number boards. If you wanted to, you could probably save the light bars for the headlights. Like I said, I'm using the Almeo light tubes that slot in, so I didn't need these center pieces, but you could probably reuse those as well if you wanted to. You just have to be really careful how you cut it. So here's how I cut it in a hobby vise with a fine-tooth saw, and this is what I was left with at the end. I just used a file and some sandpaper to clean up the edges. Once you have those cut out, we're going to go ahead and do some installations. So looking down into the shell right here, you can see the 2 light tubes from the Almeo kit that are placed inside the shell. They just slot right in, right into the holes for the headlights. And then I reinstalled the number boards. And then I used canopy glue. That's another thing on the list of things I probably should have put. You need some canopy glue or other adhesive, whatever you prefer, to glue the pieces in place in the shell. And it's the same in the front and the back. You just kind of support everything a little bit differently. All right. All right, so now how do I illuminate the number boards? This is where the surface mount LEDs come into play. So I've got them glued right onto the back of the number boards with the canopy cement. You can see that right there. Eventually, I'm going to paint all of this with black paint to prevent light leakage as much as I can. But all of that then gets just taped down with the Kapton tape. You can see it here. Kind of tuck the wires up against the top of the shell and just tape it all down as neatly as you can. It gets pretty tight in there. As you can see, things are getting kind of spicy with all these wires coming all over the place. It's going to get worse though, but then it's going to get better. But here you go. This is what it looks like on the outside. And you can see I probably could have done a better job adjusting these lenses a little bit to be Maybe this one's out a little bit too far, but that's, again, learning experience. The motor. Next up is the motor. On the bottom of the motor, you can see the 4 little feet right here. This is the bottom. You can see the feet right here. This just sits into that cradle at the bottom of the frame. I put Kapton tape on the bottom and I desoldered the wire that was on there from the factory. I then soldered an orange wire, which is for a decoder. That's what you want coming off of the motor here. And I used Kapton tape to further kind of isolate that area. Ran the wires up through the weights. So the motor is now installed back on the frame. Ran the wires up through the weight. You got to kind of find a good spot where they're not going to interfere with the flywheel, and they're going to fit through. You just got to get creative. Look around. Use your judgment. You want the wires to come out so they're accessible to be soldered once the decoder's in place. So just keep that in mind as you're running the wires. And then the black wires are going to be soldered to the inside of these 2 tabs that we cut earlier. Just a refresher, here's the pin color, the wire colors for the pins that are going to be hooked up for some of the major connectors on your DCC plug. In this photo, you'll notice there's this red wire attached to the weight here. That was just a leftover. It was actually not used in the decoder installation. I removed that. That was for the old installation. It was no longer needed. But in this photo, you'll see here's the black wire routed, here's the orange and gray wires routed, and here's the black wires routed again through the weight. The weight is now back in place on the frame. One thing I noticed, I don't know that it matters, but I noticed that these little tabs, I think it's all the same polarity, but somebody could correct me. These little tabs contacted the frame here. These are also the black leads. So I put some Kapton tape on the inside of that and on the tabs just to protect it so that it wouldn't contact the frame. So finding places to route wires is, you kind of have to get creative. This frame has this sort of recessed area. I've highlighted it with the dotted lines. It's recessed on the sides. It makes a great place to run the wires. This is what I mean by you kind of have to fiddle around and figure out what works. The frame weight, as you can see, it sits a little bit high. It's kind of rests on this piece here. So there's room to run the wires, through here, but you gotta be careful not to touch the flywheel. It looks like the tape here is touching the flywheel, but I actually eventually cut it away. So again, these are the little details you got to do. You just got to kind of spend some time tucking things in, getting neat, and that you'll get there. All right, the speaker. So the speaker fits perfectly in the space from side to side. What I did was I put a piece of first I installed the speaker into the enclosure. This is, again, per the instructions. This is where I use the flowable silicone to just sort of secure it in place. It just kind of sits in this enclosure. Don't forget to solder your wires onto the back and run them out the back. They go out. There's some holes on the side there. And then there is a hole, like a port, I guess, for sound. Just make sure that has a place to go. If you look at my model, you'll see there's a bit of space there on where it accesses over the motor. Just make sure that air has a place to escape. So what I did was I just, put a piece of double-sided tape, cut it to size, and then cut a hole for that at the bottom. And that was just stuck onto the frame there. So next up, we're going to start running wires. We're going to start installing some of the components. Here's the decoders the decoder as it comes out of the box, and the Stay Alive, the power pack. You do need to wire the power pack to the decoder. There's instructions in the manual on where all the wires go and what all the little pads are on this on the decoder. At least if you're using this setup, there's some pads here in the back that these wires run to. It's pretty straightforward, but you run those wires first. So for this decoder, as I said, I just cut the wires here because we weren't going to use the plug, and I used 2 layers of double-sided tape to attach it to the top of the frame in the area that we had milled off. And then, as you can see here, I used double-sided tape to attach the power pack to the side here, to the side of the weight, or the weight, and it just kind of sits right up above the drivetrain there. So it gets kind of tight. In this photo, you'll see that I've connected some of the wires. The purple wires are for the speaker. So those are all connected up, and the power pack is connected. The wires are routed here towards the back, and that's all connected up. But I haven't connected all of the power wires yet. You'll see that there's still some that are hanging out there. So in this photo, I'm getting ready to connect up the power wires. Here's the orange wire for the motor. You'll see the gray wire as well. And those are making the connections. Follow along in the instructions for your decoder, just to make sure, you know, everything is what it needs to be. And then I just highlighted the double-sided tape here, holding the power pack onto the side of the frame there, or side of the weight. All right. Next stage, all the wires are installed, except for the only wires that are loose here are the ones that are for the lights in the shell. So everything else is installed. There might be a couple erroneous ones here. I think that maybe these are not used with this installation. I can't remember the pink and the teal color, but everything else is in place. This is everything in on the frame, everything ready to go. Now we just need to connect up the lights. So yeah, this could be a little intimidating. This is where it takes a lot of, I think this is where you sort of the hardest part of the install is just to get all these wires together. It looks like a mess. That's just the nature of the installation, depending on your experience. You may have better wire management. I did not, you know, this shows you sort of what it was like when I was starting the process. Essentially, you're going to have to figure out how to group the wires together. For example, you know, all the black wires can be grouped together, all the commons, and then you're going to group the red wires into pairs of, you know, per light, however you're arranging your lights, and then connect them to the appropriate lights for your decoder. So, and the tricky thing here is something to keep in mind is, remember, you want the wires to be as short as possible, but also be long enough so that you can service the locomotive should you need to take the shell off, and you will at some point. So you're going to need to make sure that the shell can be removed and that you can still access everything. So don't make the wires so short that you can only lift the shell up and off. It's kind of a balancing act. But again, this was my first install. You know, I learned a lot. You take your time, think it through. The eventual outcome is that, you know, the unit now has sound. It runs really nicely. It has, you know, better overall quality. The gears now aren't you know, busted. You know, it's nothing. You know, nothing most of you haven't seen as far as DCC locomotives go. But these proto units do work nice. Some people, you know, really like the way they run. Other people might say, you know, they're not. There's some room for improvement here. Maybe you can get some finer. You know, finer motion out of these. All right, so that's my short little video of it running down the tracks. All right, so let's say, you know, all of that is great, but you know what? I want my proto unit to run even better. So this is method number 2. We're going to go a little bit further. So we're going to take everything that we did in the first, but we're going to do a couple extra things. So the first thing is we're going to upgrade the motor. And to do so, Kato makes this motor, which is a drop-in replacement. I do believe, if you something I just noticed after the fact, there's a slightly different number, I think. Yeah, so this is the wrong number. This is 95630. It's 95610 is the one. The photo I have here is wrong. Forgive me. 95610, which you'll see in the next photo. In the next slide, rather, is actually a drop-in replacement for the proto motor. In other words, it has you do need to do a little bit. Okay, you need to do a little bit of milling, but it will drop right into the frame and it will fit. This is just the motor itself, so you will need number 10, not number 30. So it's a motor with the flywheels and the old style motor mount. You're going to need one of these packs of dog bones made by Athearn, and then 2 of these worm assemblies, also made by Athearn. And again, thanks to Tom, Maddie, for his assistance with this. This was something that he helped me with. So here's the GP9, here's the motor, and you see it has these little feet, just like you saw in the other, when we removed the motor from the OEM motor. It has these little feet that fit down in the frame. So this motor is going to replace that motor in the chassis. And we can just kind of quickly do a mock-up here to try to figure out what you need to mill. So this is going to take a little bit more courage. You're actually going to need to mill a little bit more of the frame, or the weight. I keep saying frame. What I mean is the weight. You're going to mill the weight here. And all of this needs to come off. So the motor, you're going to lose some weight. Okay, that's part of the nature of this, but you're going to be left with a unit that runs a whole heck of a lot nicer. If you're really careful and you want to spend the time, you can do a little bit more surgical of milling on the frame and remove a little bit less of it. But if you're not a surgeon like me, you're going to just cut this whole area out, which is fine. And this, as you can see, this unit has some old electronics. All of that is going to go. All of this is going to come out with the installation. So this is the frame, and in order to fit the motor into the frame, you do have to do some milling of this area of the frame. So the stuff, this is sort of the bottom of the frame. You're going to need to mill out these corners to fit the new motor. So you can kind of see that's kind of where you want it to go. And this shows you what you're going to have to do, how much of it you're going to have to mill. You can do this with a Dremel. You can get these these milling bits on eBay or on Amazon. They're relatively affordable. You might need a couple extras if you end up going through them. But again, these are the kind of things that you're going to use to take this out. If you have a mill, even better. But you can do this at home by hand if you want. You just need to mill away. And this is one of those things where you just kind of test fit. You mill some of it, drop the motor in, make sure that it fits. If it does have some interference, maybe go back and take a little bit extra away. Try it again until you get it to fit nicely. And then you've got the dog bones that we purchased. They're going from inside the flywheel out here to the worm gear assembly, which again we replaced. So that's all new. And then you have the overall layout here, which shows how everything is sort of going to look now. Your installation at this point is going to be pretty straightforward, just kind of like what we did before. You now obviously have a little bit more space, so you can maybe put in a bigger speaker or get creative with how you route things. But you've got your wires and everything. The installation at this point is the same as we previously covered. You could probably also get creative with adding a little bit more weight, maybe over the motor. But again, that would take some additional custom work. But you could probably add some styrene, add some weights in there if you had a good arrangement. But the decoder will sit on top. You just put some foam tape and some styrene, and you can install it right on top. All right, so that's method number 2. So method number 3 is a sort of a ground up rethinking of this whole concept. This came about recently. Kelly Regan, he has a company. He makes some scale, some model parts and kits and details and stuff. He came up with this idea. So he was really disappointed in how these proto units were designed. You've got cracked gears. The running gear itself is very mediocre. The wheels are low quality. They're like a sintered material versus like a milled material. The electrical pickup in these proto units is actually pretty terrible. It relies on like a friction sort of contact on the trucks. It's not a very good design. If you replace just the motors and the gears, it's kind of a band-aid at best. Those gears are going to fail in the future. They don't have a great history. The proto motor is okay. The Kato motor is very nice. And many people don't really have the means to modify the frame to accept the motor. All that milling is kind of tricky. It can be tough. So What's the benefit of a custom frame? Well, we're going to use a proven drivetrain, the Kato drive, out of a Stewart F7, F3. Is sort of in my opinion, one of the sort of gold standards. They're just magnificent drives. The swap over to his frame that he designed is extremely straightforward. It's literally like it just drops right in. The electrical pickup is all on the wheels themselves. It's not like this friction, plate thing. It's really nice power pickup, and the running quality is incredible. After you do the whole conversion, the weight of the unit is either the same or even higher than the original Proto 2000 unit. The LED lights can be mounted to the frame, not the shell, so it makes it even easier. You literally just take the shell on and off. There's no wires in the shell if you want. The wiring for the whole unit is all retained within the footprint of the shell, so there's less chance of it pinching. And the decoder itself, depending on what decoder you use, you can secure it with a screw right to the motor mount, depending on the decoder. So you have like that nice, it doesn't flop around. So how do we do this? Well, what are you going to need? You're going to need a shell, a Proto 2000 shell, a GP7, GP9, GP18. Any of those will work. You don't need anything else from the Proto 2000 kit. You just need the shell. You're going to need a Stewart F3 or F7 powered A or B unit. These are found all over the place. And you want to, if you're looking on eBay, look for the dog paint schemes, the ones that just aren't as popular, the ones that, aren't selling. I mean, there's so many of Stewart produced so many of these. You can find them at shows. 30 to 60 bucks is your price range that you want to spend on this. That's the goal. And then you're going to need the Fine Scale 360 kit. So this is the kit he sells on his site. It's $109 for the entire kit, which comes with everything that you need, or 88 bucks for just the frame itself. And don't forget, you're also going to need your DCC and sound decoder, your Stay Alive, and your LEDs as well, of course. As a side note, Bowser, of course, as you know, took over Stewart. They then produced clones of these drives. They also will work. They're also, decent quality, but they are not the same. Just a note. If you're wondering what your Stewart drive is, if it is a Kato drive, just flip it over and look on the bottom, and it will say Kato if it's a Kato drive. So how did this happen? Kelly, as I said, we did the frame milling, we did the replacement of the drive in our GP7s and GP18s, and we weren't he wasn't really happy with how it went together. He found a lot of issues with it. So Kelly, being the maker that he is, he went out and designed frames. He did some test runs that were 3D printed just to mock it up and to work out some of the kinks. He did it step by step. First, he thought he was just going to replace the motor and use the Proto 2000 drivetrain, and realized that he thought that it could use some improvement, and eventually ended up with the Stewart drives. So we got some brass stock and milled it out. And this is just a couple really quick videos of his CNC in action doing the frames. Each one is custom made. He does it all at home, and it's pretty cool. Sorry if you hear my dog in the background. It's dinner time. All right, and then this is just a lineup of the frames after they've been milled. They also come with this neat little 3D printed sort of bracket that allows you to add additional weight and have a place for your decoders. So yeah, so here's the Proto unit after it's been milled. And then here his was milled a little bit differently for a different speaker. As you can see, it's slightly different. And then here's his setup here, which is a little bit heavier. Of course, the couple things are missing, so it's just about the same weight. All right, so what does it look like? This is a couple close-up shots of the frame all put together. You can see the decoders. I can't remember which decoder he used here. I think it's a TCS, but I could be wrong. But here you can see the LEDs mounted to the front of the weights, and they just are on there with double-sided tape, and they run to the board, all the pickups, everything. It all fits in there. You could also, if you really wanted to, you could replace one of the weights for another speaker. You could have dual speaker setup for more sound, if you wanted. But these are really nicely engineered units. They're beefy. They run just incredibly well. Um, this is a pretty crappy video of one. I just wanted to say, like, they're amazing. They run as well as those old Stewart units do, obviously. But you can have your proto shell on it. And they're beautiful. This is on Kelly's layout. He was doing a quick shot of it. So you see the LED flashing. That's just because of the camera. It doesn't actually flash right, it's the naked eye. And it does focus. There it goes. So they run beautifully. The electrical pickup is nice. It's a nice running unit. If you're interested, he has them for sale on his website, Fine Scale 360. He's got a couple options there, and you can check that out. All right, so a quick summary. The upgrading these units, it is a little bit of work, but it isn't that bad. And because the units aren't so expensive, I really do feel like this is a great way to jump in to DCC installations. Doesn't have to be as complicated as what I did. Like I said, with the lights, you can really simplify it if you just put one LED on each end of the light box and you're done. You don't have to fiddle around with all those extra wires. I will highly recommend the Fine Scale 360 drives, and that's not just because Kelly is a good friend of mine. Going through this with him as he developed this, I came to realize that the proto drives do have issues, and if you're in it for the long haul with your proto models, it's a great option to consider if you really want to upgrade them to run nicely. I do highly recommend them. At this point, if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them or try to answer them.
Well, Ben, I have a question.
Yes.
Resistors.
Yes.
Okay, with your LEDs, did they require resistors? And if so, where did you put the resistors?
So with the setup that I have, if you recall, I used those monster LEDs. They came with the resistors already installed in line, as part of the installation. I'm not going to. I don't want to tell you where they go because like I said, I'm not an expert. They go in line with the LED. You have to get them in the right direction, in the right place. Somebody here who's better at it can probably sound off and say the best way to do that. Follow the instructions that come with the kit that you have.
Okay.
That'll take a little bit of extra research. So I don't actually have the complete answer for that.
Okay. The reason I was asking was I went through and I did 2 Atherin GP60 blue boxes. And of course, the resistors became a hurdle trying to figure out where to put them. And I found the dynamic brake space up above the cap came off of that. And he provided space. I was able to get those resistors mounted in there to get them out of the way, to get them away from where I guess the other bulk of the body, if you would be, with regards to the motor and such. So it became, they were mounted to the shell versus being mounted somewhere on the frame. So I was just curious.
Yeah, and I see Kelly pointed out in the chat, a lot of decoders have the resistors built into them. If somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Nix Trains decoder buddies have it. You can get them in different levels. They have different resistance levels. It's built onto the board, so you don't even have to add it. But if I were going to put resistors, they would just be in line, in the heat shrink, in the installation, and like you said, just get tucked up into the shell.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, Benjamin, what a fantastic presentation. It made me go and dig out my PK2000 GP7 that I converted. I looked at my notes way back in 2008 with a ESU 3.5 driving a 100 ohm speaker, actually two speakers. Couple of comments more than questions, because I think your presentation was very, very clear. Number one, don't spend a fortune on soldering irons. You can pick them up on eBay for $15 or $16. They're temperature regulated. They've got really not, they're pencil type irons, and they work really well. Solder, rather than using lots of liquid flux, I always use cord, low residue flux solder from Kester. And so you don't have to worry about liquid flux going everywhere. I was a bit concerned about your comments on getting a better motor with the Kato unit. I've actually done that, and using exactly what you did, which is a motor unit from the Stewart. I actually find the PK2 motors to be as good as the Stewart motors. Some of those old Stewart motors that you pick up in a model for 20 or 30 bucks, they're a little bit grindy, and they're actually Kato units. So be careful and a bit more circumspect when you're doing this. One crucial point that I found was that when you buy one of these old PK2 2000 units, yeah, number one, you're going to have to change the gears. I just buy them loose from Athen and stick them on myself, so it's cost effective. The other thing is, don't run it until you strip down the gears, and especially on the tower, because the grease that they use actually solidifies solid, and you're quite likely to snap the dog bone connections. So rather than sticking it on a piece of DC track and making sure that it's working, it's actually best to strip it down first, get rid of all that solidified grease that's going to crack the drive, as well as the gears as well. And before you actually run it, otherwise there's some problems. I didn't mill anywhere near. I was looking at this particular model, so I ripped off the shell and had a look at what I did, which is getting for 12 odd years ago now, not even more. I didn't bother with speaker boxes. I just used some double-sided foam tape from 3M that you use for sticking things on walls. And I just put the speaker directly on it. And I looked at my notes from when I built the thing. And I did try putting a box in and then just using tape as opposed to a box. And actually it worked just as well. Now, maybe my ears aren't that sensitive to all this sort of stuff. The other thing that I've always done from the first day, way back then, when I did a DCC conversion, was that I always keep the connectors on the decoder, and I always put in a basic circuit breaker between the decoder and the speakers, and the decoder and the power supplies. So you don't have to worry about having long pieces of wire when you lift the shell off so you can work on the mechanism. You can simply disconnect the whole thing. So you've got a chassis where all of the electrical connections are basically can be taken apart and then put back together again. So you can use some of those very small micro connections, and you can get them in 2, 4, or 6 wire versions. So you can actually wire in the LEDs quite easily. The other tip that might be useful is to have some fiber optic tubing, because if you can't find a LED that will do the job, you can actually use some fiber optic tubing. You just heat the end up and then pull it through, and as it solidifies, it will lock it in place into the hole. And then you run the wires to whatever bulb and put in a convenient location where you can do this. So ideal for things like ditch lights, where you might find it difficult to run the wiring through. But I find that having connectors between basically the decoder and everything else, and the decoder and the speaker or speakers if you're using more than one speaker. And that's the other thing I found over the years, that if you want a bit more depth to the speaking, to the speakers, it's actually better to have 2 smaller sugar cube type speakers than to try and stuff in a really big bass speaker, which is not going to do the job anyway. I found the thing on having a pre-milled chassis. I thought that was really exciting, and I can see why you'd want to do that. But as I say, if you just want a basic model that's going to run adequately, you don't need to go to those lengths. I've even got as far as individually wiring every wheel. I wouldn't like to do this on a CC type unit. And that's the other thing. If you're converting a PK2 CC type model, such as an E7A, for example, the cracked gears are not so much a problem on the 6 wheel axles as they are on the 4-wheel axles for some reason. And I'm always struck by the fact that once you strip down a PK2 model, it actually looks like an ancient Athern model. So you can see where PK2 got most of their bits and pieces and the design from when they were first started out on this. So you're essentially working on what once it's stripped down, it looks like an old Athern model. So, but I thoroughly recommend anybody who's not done this before, have a go at it. Those models are dirt cheap at places like Timonium, sort of, I've seen them at $25. Simply because the sellers know that they've got cracked gears and the mechanism's seized, so you've got to take it apart. So for a couple of hours work and maybe $10 or $15 worth of bits and pieces, you can actually come up with a decent running chassis. So again, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to repeat one thing. The old adage, like, DCC will not improve a poorly running locomotive. As you mentioned, like, make sure that make sure that the locomotive that you're gonna work on runs well. You don't need to. You can take your proto out of the box, replace the gears, and put it back in the box, and it'll be improved. It'll run better. But you want to make sure that the locomotive runs better. Like your comments about the grindy mechanisms. Like, make sure that the one you have that you're going to use, it will work for what you want it to do. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Ben, there's one other question in the chat from James Butler. He's asking if you could address that if possible.
Yes, I see that. I do not know. I don't have an answer for you. Kelly, who's in the chat, might have a better answer. I don't do CNC. Kelly does CNC. And I don't know about any pre-programmed sequences. But he'll probably reply in the chat if he has an answer. I also see one other question I wanted to address. Lee asked, how do you determine what decoder goes into each locomotive? That seems to be my toughest part of figuring out what decoder. In other words, like how do you choose your decoder? Going back to what I said earlier about sort of the Coke and Pepsi thing, people have preferences, and generally, I think generally, people will advise you to kind of, if you're going to do this, if you're going to do decoder installations, find one that you like and kind of stick to that family, because there's often a lot of commonality in how you end up programming them and working with them. You get more familiar with it. If you have different decoders of all different kinds, it becomes a little bit more complex. It's fine to do that. But if you're getting started, maybe find one that you feel comfortable with and stick with it for a while. I settled on ESU because I like the ability to modify things. I like the way I like the way that it's designed. Tom Matty, who I mentioned, who helped me with the second section, he uses all soundtracks. And Kelly likes TCS. Kelly doing the Fine Scale 360 stuff. He really likes the TCS decoders. And as far as figuring out which one goes into what locomotive, each decoder brand does it slightly differently. Like ESU allows you to buy a decoder and then program it with whatever prime mover you'd like to have on it. Soundtracks, you buy a decoder that has a set number of prime movers on it, or a style, or like a GE style, and then you can select which one you want in the decoder. And I think TCS is kind of similar to the soundtracks, I believe. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I don't use TCS that often, but I think they kind of operate that way. So I would say, you're gonna need to. It's a little bit of trial and error. I would lean on the community to try to help you figure out what you need for your application, and ask folks in your club that can maybe help sort of narrow it down. People who do it more regularly. I'm still a beginner. Like I said, like that installation was my first installation, and I've only done a few others. I'm still learning, so I don't have I can't just tell you what decoder to use. But visit the manufacturer's site. Oftentimes they have lists and tools to help you figure out what will work with your application. And usually it's what model are you putting it into? If you're putting it into a GP7, you're going to want the prime mover that unit used. And so that kind of helps to narrow it down. That's usually how they're grouped. But then there's also generic ones, but that's generally the way forward. Anybody else have any questions?
Well, Ben, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule, and thank everybody that came in to the session today. A lot of good information, very well presented, and I've learned a little bit today myself. I think Nigel was talking about the Atheron blue boxes, or the Atheron locomotives versus the Proto, and like I say, with my GP60s I was working on, when I was looking at your GP9, a lot of similarity in the things and the layout of the trucks and such. And one of the things that I had done, and I don't know if it made a difference or not, but when I put my wires down to the trucks, I eliminated the pickups that were provided on the original locomotive and went down and soldered directly onto the truck itself at the pickup point to try to make that better. And I think that was an improvement, because I found with the Atheron, that was a two-piece assembly on the headlight in the front, and depending upon whether it was having a good day or a bad day, it may or may not make connections. So I thought that you better just go ahead and take that completely out and go down to the truck itself and tackle it there to get the wire on.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I actually had that in my notes and I took it out because I didn't do it. But Kelly, when he was going through all of his process, he mentioned to me, he's like, I don't know why they did this. He did that. He actually wired it to the truck, and that was going to be one of my tips. Yeah, so that's a great point. You should definitely get rid of those stupid friction things and go straight down to the truck.
Yeah. Let's see. Does anybody else have anything they want to talk to Ben about? If not, I can we'll terminate and let you all go and enjoy football, baseball, whatever. The Yankees won last night, so that's, for me, that's a nice thing. I'm not a big Yankee fan, but I was glad to see the Yankees take it over the other guys because being a Steelers fan, I just can't stand Cleveland anyhow, so it's okay. But it's all good. So if nobody else has any questions, Kelly, I'll be sending you well, it won't be a big certificate, but you get your certificate for thanking you for doing this for the division. And